Well, and a gracious good day to all of you. Once again, this is Mike Hinkson, and I'm your host. And this is Unstoppable Mindset, where inclusion, diversity, and the unexpected meet. Today, we get to chat with Hawa Allarakhia. And Hawa has a very interesting story, and I've got a really interesting question to ask right up front. I'm going to save it, but I'll tell you the question. Hawa has a bachelor's and a master's degree, and she is going after a doctorate. And Hawa, you're doing them all from the University of South Florida, but at 3 different campuses. I'm curious about that, but you can answer that whenever you want to. But for right now, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset. We're really glad you're here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure, and I'm really excited about our conversation today.
Well, tell us a little bit about kind of you growing up, the early Hawa and all that, and let's go from there.
So, growing up, I am a true Floridian. I was born in Tampa, Florida, and I've had the fortunate experience of living in the area, in the Tampa Bay area, my entire life. So that's where my heart lies, and that's what I call home. In the early years at birth, I was actually born 25 weeks gestation, weighing 1 pound and 11 ounces. And at birth, I received the diagnosis of cerebral palsy. What that means is I have a hemiparesis on my left side, which means the left side of my body is a lot weaker than the right, and I can't really use my arm too much. In terms of my mobility, as a child, I crawled everywhere. But then as I grew older, those wear and tear on the bones and muscles of my lower body didn't allow me to do that anymore. So I started using a walker more regularly, and just grew to do more things independently as I got older. But the early years were filled with a lot of ups and downs when it came to school. Trying to figure out how to navigate the world of accommodations and everything like that. Now, school was a lot different than it is today. So I find that to be a bit of a blessing that I don't have to deal with those red tape and everything like people do today. But school was always like my light in all the stuff that I had to deal with, whether it was doctor's appointments or physical therapy or even occupational therapy after school. My parents have taught me that education is literally my key to life and becoming, a good working member of society. So I've always thought learning was so important. And no matter how hard it was, whether it was staying up half the night to prep for the SAT or just writing a paper because it took me longer to do than everybody else, I always knew that the end journey, would be worth it. And that's kind of what led me to, just continually pursuing education up until today and probably into the future.
Wow. Well, you beat me. I was born early also. I weighed 2 pounds, 13 ounces and was born 8 weeks premature. But since you were born so early, did you have any issues with eyesight at all and being given a pure oxygen environment in an incubator or any of those kinds of things until you were a little bit more substantial in life, as it were?
Yes. So being born so prematurely, my parents were told that, there would be a lot of different issues that I would have to deal with, whether that was like physical movement but also vision. And, what they told my parents was she's either going to leave here in the incubator at 4 months or 4 pounds, whichever comes first. So it just happened to be a coincidence that at 4 months post-birth, I reached 4 pounds, so they let us go home.
That worked out well. Did you have any eyesight or vision issues? Or I should say, do you have any today?
I do. So, in terms of my vision, my left visual field is a lot weaker than my right. I have trouble focusing on distant objects. And then also, when I hit the teenage years, I tried to learn how to drive like everybody else. And with my hemiparesis on the left side, what tended to happen was, even if I was looking, let's say, at an object or taking my car to the right, my vision and my the tension in my left side would help pull me and the vehicle to the left, and kind of came to the conclusion after that it probably was a better idea to put the possibility of driving on hold for a while. So I'm really looking forward to the ramping up that comes with autonomous vehicles, because I'm hoping that that'll give me a lot more independence.
You're not alone. I as well. I'm looking forward to that being perfected, and it will. It may take a little while yet, but we're going to get good autonomous vehicle operations. It's just that we are right now kind of in the nexus of all of it and on the cusp of it getting to the point where it will be pretty good. But it's going to happen, and we're seeing a lot of examples of it working. So I think the day is going to come and that we'll all be able to take advantage of that. And frankly, I'm very happy about that, because I think that given the way a lot of people drive today, we ought to take driving out of the hands of drivers anyway.
I definitely agree with you. I just, every time I get in the car, I say a little prayer that I get to the destination without any incident.
Yes, absolutely so. Well, and the reason I asked about your eyesight, of course, is that being born premature, I also was in an incubator and did become blind because of that. What used to be called retrolental fibroplasia, which is now retinopathy of prematurity. And I'm not sure that that's really a whole lot easier to spell, but they changed the words anyway. But so I've driven, but under the direction of someone else. And I actually had an opportunity a few years ago to drive a Tesla, and the driver was next to me, of course, but I actually drove a Tesla for about 15 miles down one of the busier roads going from up where we live down toward San Bernardino and Ontario. So we were driving down a hill through a pass and so on. And it was a lot of fun. But I think that it will be good when we can really have autonomous vehicles that people can trust and that are as safe as we really need them to be. And it'll happen.
Definitely. And I'll definitely be one of the first people in line to try that out for sure.
Yeah, and buy one.
Yeah.
Yep, it will be interesting to see. Well, so you've come by your desires and interests in education very honestly, because your parents really taught you the value of doing that, which is really pretty cool. So you started out by getting a bachelor's in world languages, specifically in Spanish, I believe.
I did. And, part of the reason I did that was actually twofold. At the time, during my undergraduate years, I was actually originally an elementary education major. And I got to the first stage of where we are required to do a teaching classroom internship. And, this is one of those situations where even all the requests for accommodations in the world and, all the written proof in the world doesn't, put forth the results you would like. So in that situation, what happened was I was assigned a first grade classroom with about 20 something 6-year-olds when I had made a written request that based on my skills and experience, I would be more suited to work with older children in either the 4th or 5th grade. And I was requesting this as a type of accommodation so that I could be successful in the internship. And unfortunately, those requests were denied. and without, concrete reason. And I was assigned into this lower level classroom, and, getting little kids to listen to you, whether you're in a wheelchair or not, is quite a task. And, when I brought my concerns to the college, they were just kind of like, there's nothing really we can do. You have to pass. And then when I brought up the possibility of transferring to another campus that is affiliated with the university, and that where I could move home to do the internship in my local school, that suggestion was denied based on the difficulty that the supervisor would have to come and observe me. And basically, I was left with one choice: redo the internship in their selected setting at the same level, or just leave the program. So fortunately, I had been minoring in Spanish at the time, and the difference between a minor and a major at that point was only a few more classes, I believe, to at least 4. So I switched my major and graduated when I was supposed to. But that's just one of life's challenges. And even though I was disappointed in the end of how the situation ended, it was probably, a positive thing, because when I went into grad school and, entered my master's in education, I felt like it was, a better fit for me and more of my pace for learning, because I always saw myself as even when I thought I was going to be in, K through 12, I always pictured myself as some type of administrator, like a guidance counselor or something like that. So, and I think in the end, I'm sort of on the path that I'm meant to be on.
Well, so you got your degree in Spanish, but clearly you still had an interest in education, because you went off then to the Sarasota campus, if I'm remembering right, and you got your master's in education.
I did. And, my reason for coming to the Sarasota campus was because it was closer to home, and the program was online, so I wasn't really required to live on campus or anything like that. And coming home to Sarasota and to the Sarasota campus kind of afforded me like an opportunity to start working in higher education, as I'm currently doing right now. And it's offered me a lot of different experiences. I've worked in the field of admissions, academic advising, diversity and inclusion, and currently I work as a graduate assistant here on the Sarasota campus in the Office of Research.
Well, so how do you think that the sidelining, at least for a little while, of what you had planned, that is needing to graduate with a degree in Spanish as opposed to being in education, but then going back to it, of course, but how do you think that them not accommodating your needs and so on really has affected you and your outlook?
Well, I really think it affected me and my outlook because, besides the fact that my written requests were denied, I couldn't, I didn't really feel supported by the, what they call the cooperating teacher who I was, being administered under. And, I had this feeling at the end of it, that in my gut, that, maybe she'd never come across, even though she'd been teaching for over 35 years, maybe she'd never come across anyone who had any type of disability, and she just didn't know like how to navigate that, and how to be supportive and all that kind of stuff. And maybe slightly, she had some discriminatory problems with me being there. But the problem was I couldn't actually prove any of that and like build myself a case to say that all of these factors have contributed to the fact that I couldn't succeed in this environment. And I had to swallow, all the hurt and difficulty and just say, no, I'm still going to finish. It might not be what I started, but I'm still going to finish, and I can go back to the thing that I care about most in a different way. And I just had to take time to mourn the loss of the path that I thought I was going to be on so that I could find a new one. And, I just think that I hope that, now and there have been other students who might have been in my position and they've succeeded. So I know that, things are changing. But again, the best way to make change is to change it from the inside.
Have you had any interaction with her since now going on and getting a master's degree and so on? Or have you been able to maybe have any kind of conversation about that with her?
No, that's the unfortunate thing about it. I haven't had that opportunity to have any type of conversation with any of the parties involved because the university asked me not to continue communication with the educator that I was under the supervision under, and also those individuals who were involved in this scenario with the university are no longer here. So that hasn't afforded me the opportunity to kind of go back and talk to them and say, well, okay, this is what you did, but look where I've ended up anyway, kind of the situation. But, who knows what the future holds? They might reconnect with me on some other opportunity at some point or not. I'm kind of at the point where, that's a part of my story and it made me a stronger person.
Well, and you don't want to take the approach of, I told you so, but rather you want to progress yourself. And hopefully the time will come that maybe you can be the teacher to help them better understand, unless they've gained along the way a better understanding. I hear what you're saying about the way it used to be, and now there's a lot more red tape and a lot of rules and so on. But at the same time, there's also, in some ways, a lot more access than there used to be. I know my wife was in a wheelchair her whole life. And are you using a wheelchair today?
So I use two types of mobility equipment when I'm here on campus. I use a motorized scooter, and then I also have a manual chair that if I'm with somebody else, then they push that.
They can push.
I use that when I go out with my parents or when we're traveling, because it's easier to lug that around than a big old scooter on the plane.
Oh, yeah, definitely true. My wife went for her undergraduate work to the University of California at Riverside and was very actively involved back in that time when they had the International Year of the Disabled, and was very involved in advocating for access around the UC Riverside campus, where there wasn't a lot of access up front. And it was pre-Americans with Disabilities Act as well. But she was involved. I didn't have the same kinds of involvement. For me, it was more getting access to materials in Braille and so on. But she had very physical issues to deal with, and that is she couldn't get into buildings and so on. And but she worked through that, and she learned how to negotiate and to educate, which is something that you're doing and that you want to do. And that's cool. And now we do have more laws on our side, if you will, than we used to, which does also help.
It does. I think the most important lesson that I've learned so far in life is that, there's always room for improvement. I mean, everything has, everything could always be better and more improved and more accessible. And, you know, the most important thing is for the people who have the lived experiences to just keep sharing their stories and their opinions and their voices, because you know, no one can stop your voice unless you let them. So that, you know, that's something I always believe in and carry with me every day.
Yeah. And that is a wonderful attitude to have and to carry with you. Well, for you, so you knew, I think, instinctively that teaching first graders was probably going to be a challenge for you. My wife did some of that. She was a teacher for 10 years. She liked third graders and fourth graders. She wasn't as excited about teaching much older kids because by that time, too many attitudes were developed and it was harder to sometimes get the kids to do what she wanted. But she always loved teaching like third graders. She thought that was really kind of, for her, the best age to teach. But for you, it sounds like you had, to a degree, the same kind of attitude, but you ended up really advancing that further and going into higher education. Who or what really sort of promoted that in your mind, and what caused you to really do that?
Well, that's a really interesting story, because like I mentioned earlier, when I started my undergraduate journey, I really pictured myself in sort of a K through 12 administrative role, probably a guidance counselor or what they called an ESE specialist. And that's where I saw myself going. And then when I was in the College of Education at the University of South Florida, St. Petersburg campus, I had this advisor, and her name was Dr. Bollard, and she was like unlike any advisor I had met before then. She was so supportive. She never pressured me into taking more classes than I thought I could handle. She never made me feel bad if I was having a tough semester and it wasn't going as well as I had hoped. And she just really stood by me, even after this whole changing majors debacle. She just was like a big support for me. And, you know, at that time, after that whole debacle, I started to think, you know, wait, maybe there's a different path for me. Maybe I don't have to be in, you know, a K through 12 setting. And I started to think about, you know, the other people that support students in higher ed. And, you know, and so I was like, well, I could be her, you know, for other people, and I could share my challenges that I faced with other students who have difficulties. And so, you know, that's when I started thinking, okay, I don't need to get a master's degree. And then I said, okay, well, and then, you know, later on I said, well, I know people who have done her job and they have a master's degree, but the other part of my, you know, vision to getting a doctorate degree actually comes back to my dad, because he is a physician, and as a child, I didn't realize the limitations of my disability, and I always pictured myself, oh, I'm going to be just like Daddy. I'm going to be a doctor. And, you know, and then obviously as I got older, I realized that, you know, that path was probably going to be more difficult than I would like. And I found this new path, and, you know, in time, I will follow this path and somewhat, even though in a different field, follow in my dad's footsteps and have a doctorate of my own.
You will become a doctor, which is fine. That's fair. And that is really cool. So then you'll have a family with at least 2 doctors in it.
Yes.
Which is always good. Now, I will ask the question I started out with earlier. You have now gone to 3 different University of South Florida campuses. How come switching from one campus to another?
Well,
what a spiteful question. I know.
I mean, you know, it's all about the journey. when I started college, I actually didn't start out at the University of South Florida. My first college experience happened at a place called Florida Gulf Coast University in Fort Myers. And I spent 2 years there, and due to medical reasons, I had to come home to Sarasota to recover from a shoulder operation. And after that operation, the people at Florida Gulf Coast, another accessibility issue, the people at Florida Gulf Coast would not let me live in the underclassmen undergraduate housing, which had the accessible dorms and facilities. They wanted me to move into upperclassmen housing, which was apartment style and didn't really meet my needs. So instead of getting into this huge argument and fighting a fight that would probably take more time to win and put education on hold, I kind of reevaluated my situation, and I thought back to all those college tours I had taken, and I thought, where was the other place I thought was really cool? And that's where I kind of thought about the University of South Florida St. Petersburg campus, because it was not as big as the Tampa campus, which serves almost over 70,000 students. And it kind of gave me the best of both worlds. I could get to know my professors, and I could have a comfortable experience living on campus. So that's where I finished my undergrad years. And then when it came time for my master's degree, I looked at staying in St. Pete, but they just didn't have a program that I felt would meet my needs. So when I found the program at the Sarasota campus, I was like, okay, well, this will be flexible, and I get to go home for my master's, and that had led me to getting all these on-campus opportunities in my current position. And as far as the Tampa campus goes, even though we're consolidated into a single institution, we are still kind of in that infancy where Tampa is the only campus where they have doctoral programs. So that's kind of how I ended up on all three campuses, and have had that experience to say that, I'm going to be what they call a triple bull, which means you've got an every degree level on camp at one of the campuses. That's what the people call it around here. So it's going to be good when it happens. And I'm excited for that day, whenever that is going to be. I can't put a pin on it right now, but I know it's going to be in the near future for sure.
It's good to be a gypsy and be able to wander to different campuses. And in reality, of course, you do get different experiences, which is kind of fun. And I agree with you. I did my undergraduate work at the University of California at Irvine, and the year I became a freshman was the first year that campus had a graduating class. So I think there were like 2,700 students on campus. It was a very large campus, very open, not very many buildings, but buildings that were being constructed. Now the place is crazy. I was there a few years ago and wouldn't even know how to get around the place. But there's a lot of value, as you said, in having an environment where you can really work with professors and meet professors and talk with them, and have a lot more of a personal experience. And I really value that a lot too. And it's important to be able to have that. Well, so when you were in college, and you had given me this question, what was the lesson that you learned in your first year of college? There was something that must have happened that really helped shape something.
Well, that lesson, unlike most people, I started my college career during a summer session. So when you go to these orientations, there's so many people, and you schedule a meeting with an advisor to select your courses for the semester, but it's so crunched for time that they kind of pressure you into making certain decisions that if you had a little more time to think about it, you probably wouldn't do that. So what happened was, they said, let's start out with 2 classes since it's the summer session. And, you want to get those general education requirements out of the way. So I had signed up for Composition 1, and I believe it was an intermediate algebra class. But I hadn't really had a lot of experience with this condensed learning environment where instead of having 4 months to complete curriculum, you only had 6 weeks. So that put a lot of pressure on me to perform, and which raised my anxiety, and that didn't help me in the algebra class. So the lesson I would take from that is whatever you do, no matter what math class it is, don't take it during the summer ever.
Yeah. It is more of a challenge. And as you said, it is also an issue where you have less time to get things done. I never did take summer courses, but I was in college during, of course, the rest of the year. But I understand exactly what you're saying. So as you went through college, going and getting your undergraduate degree and then getting your master's degree, what kind of lessons do you think you learned that will help you going forward?
Well, I think the one, for both of them, and even right now, while I'm pursuing my doctorate, the one lesson I've learned is, I need everybody, whatever your circumstances, you need to give yourself a break every once in a while, because there's all these outside forces that are already putting pressure on you, whether that's, how much you have to work and go to school, or family obligations, or whatever it may be. But sometimes you just need to give yourself a break. If you'd rather turn in a good assignment that you've done when you were ready and fresh, and have your thoughts as clear as they can be, than one that might not be as good because you did it when you were too tired. So, for those people who think I have to graduate in a certain amount of time, and there's all this pressure that comes from other places, just take a step back and give yourself a break. I know, there'll be people, whether that's your counselor or even your friends, who say, come on, let's get done quick, and then you'll get out to the real world. But this is a golden opportunity to learn all sorts of skills, whether they're inside the classroom or outside. And you need to take the time and the opportunity to do that, because having this time to gain knowledge is going to be, you'll never have it again. It's invaluable.
Do you do much in the way of extracurricular activities, or did you in your undergraduate and master's programs?
So, in undergrad, while I was at Florida Gulf Coast, I did participate in what they call Greek life. I was a part of a sorority that a family friend was a member of and suggested that I join. The first year was really exciting, and I made a lot of friends, and we had all these campus events, and I got more comfortable with socializing with people and everything. And because we were what they call the first inaugural chapter of this organization on the campus, most of the stuff was on campus. So that was fine, and it was fun, and it got me to meet people and stuff. But then the next year, here's where, accessibility and kind of, that kind of thing came into play. We started doing stuff off campus, and that where I got a little bit uncomfortable with that, because that meant I had to rely on someone to, maybe take me to the event and bring me home. And then I knew there was going to be drinking involved, or because it was at a restaurant or a bar or something. And I was just not comfortable putting my safety in the hands of somebody else, when I knew we were going to come home late and all that. And, I made a conscious decision that, well, because of for my own good, I kind of need to step away from this situation. And, even if it probably wasn't the best for my social life, I think at the end of the day, it was probably, a good decision in other aspects of my life because I focused on school and, doing other things. But I do think that, that socialization is really important. And, from what I know now, from an accessibility standpoint, if I were to go back, I would have tried to be more vocal about, making sure that we continued to have more events on campus instead of off campus, so that, other people who couldn't just pick up and go could participate. So,
Yeah. Yeah. It becomes an issue. What did you do during your master's years? Did you do anything in terms of other than studying, or did you just focus on that to get through?
well, during my master's, because I felt like it was a little bit not easier, but there was not that, you have to be in class in person from this time to this time. What I was able to do and what I started doing during the master's program, and I continue to do to this day, is work on campus. So that's when I started working in admissions and advising, and and those are the experiences that brought me closer to the students, and and a different type of interaction, because you're interacting with people who are already attending the university, but you're also interacting with people who are thinking about attending the university, and you could share your experiences, and you could kind of be those eyes and ears for the people who don't, are thinking about where they want to take their education and career in life.
Well, you have talked a lot about the whole issue of persons with disabilities and so on. So, and I want to really focus on that a little bit. But first, you graduated, you got your master's degree, and then what did you do? Because that's now been 5 years.
Yeah, so I graduated with my master's degree in May 2018, and after taking a short 3-month hiatus, I jumped right into pursuing my doctorate. So since the fall of 2018, I've been pursuing my doctorate. Right now, I just received permission from the dean for them to assist me in distributing my instrument. So graduation survey, which is my instrument, graduation is going to be shortly. I can't put a date on it right now, but I'm hoping that it's going to be, within the next at least 2 or 3 semesters, I hope. So after that, who knows where life takes me. I'm really into doing other things. I love traveling, so I'm hoping that once this is school is kind of no longer a permanent part of my life, that my family and I can do more traveling.
Yeah, you've been all over. I think you said every year, every continent except Antarctica.
Yes, so that's one of the things we love to do as a family, and my parents have been fortunate enough that they haven't let the fact that we have to lug around all this mobility equipment stop us from seeing the world. So it's definitely one of the things that we do as a family for fun, and I'm definitely looking forward to doing more of that.
Of course, you've got, in some senses, the advantage of using a manual chair and somebody pushing you. But obviously, you've seen a lot of inaccessible places.
Yeah. So I have, and I've seen a lot of other interesting. I just came back from Norway a couple of weeks ago, and while I was there, I saw this individual. They had this. They turned their manual wheelchair into a motorized one because they had this attachment. It kind of looks like a bicycle, like a bicycle handle that attaches the front of your wheelchair, and it has a little motor inside, and then once you attach that to the wheelchair and you use the controls, the wheelchair actually becomes motorized like a little scooter.
Yeah, my wife had one of those for a while before she started full-time using a power chair.
Yeah, so I thought that was really interesting, and I'm definitely interested in exploring different things like that as we, travel more and all that kind of stuff. So, but it's always a good time to take it kind of gives us the opportunity to switch off and just spend time together as family.
Which is also important to be able to do. Your family's been very supportive.
They have. I wouldn't be where I am without my parents or the rest of my extended family. They're always supporting me with whatever I want to do. Besides, while you're in a doctorate program, once you finish the coursework and you start doing your research, and there's a lot of waiting because you're waiting for feedback from a faculty member, and they might be working with like at least 15 other students. So what I've been doing since during those waiting periods is writing a lot of articles, and I'm trying to sort of build my freelance portfolio. So I'm always looking for opportunities to write about diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. And I'm even in the throes of outlining a memoir based on essays that I'm writing right now. So those are the things I'm doing outside of like my current position at the university and school.
What do you do at the university? What's your job?
So right now I serve as the graduate assistant in the Office of Research, and I'm in charge of all our student programming. So I facilitate and plan and run our annual undergraduate and graduate research conference in the spring. I assist my boss in facilitating a workshop for graduate students about grant writing. And then in the summer, because she also does a workshop for faculty, I help her with that. So I do some of the course design, I do some of the grading, and I kind of just run and plan all the other events that we have going on in our office on campus.
It sounds like you have a pretty supportive environment right now, though.
I do, but I'm excited for what the future holds, and who knows what other opportunities will come knocking.
Well, yeah, that's going to be an adventure, isn't it? What do you, in terms of your own thoughts, at least at this point, what do you want to do once you get your doctorate?
So in terms of with the path I'm seeing myself go on is really heading back to that classroom setting, and hopefully teaching some courses that have to do with accessibility and education. And also, there's also a lot of with all the legal stuff going on, there's also a lot of new context to that. So I'm hoping that in the next section of my life, I get to impart my wisdom and knowledge on fellow students, and in terms of accessibility and navigating college as a student. Because I have a really unique opportunity here at the university. Gaining a doctorate in education, which focuses on program development. It means that the courses taught in the program are really kind of where they build you build your own path. So, there's always new courses in development with the program. So I'm not really sure what type of courses I'm going to teach right now, but I know that the relationships I've built right now are going to help me figure that out.
Well, you are It sounds like you want to stay in higher education, though, as opposed to going back down and teaching to younger students.
I do, because I've spent a lot of time here, and I think that the lessons that I've learned as a student and as in my work positions have just given me a really good purview of the struggles that people face and how they can overcome them, regardless of their disability or any challenge they have on their plate.
What do you see as maybe some critical issues that need to be addressed or challenges that exist today in the whole field of higher education?
I think our biggest challenge that we face right now is the stifling of diverse opinions and voices, because especially here in this state, we're if you don't, so here's what I don't understand about the context of how people view diversity. So if certain people view diversity as a positive thing, that all aspects of a person's personality and culture and everything that makes them them is so important to realize and recognize, while other people view highlighting those diverse aspects of a person as not positive because it puts down what they consider the status quo of how society should view people. So I think our major issue across higher ed is to make sure that all those diverse communities and even minority groups is to support their voice and make sure that they continue to be heard and grow, and not to stifle that and kind of put them in a box and lock them away. We've already been through all that kind of stuff, and right now I kind of feel like we're circling back to a time where I don't think anyone would be comfortable with, where and back into the 50s and the 60s and all that kind of stuff. So I'm really doing my absolute best to raise the voice when it comes to accessibility and all sorts of issues, because it is feeling kind of stifled at times.
We've been watching on the news. I know out here we have certainly seen on the news about all the things going on in Florida and the governor talking about not funding diversity and so on. Does that affect persons with disabilities as much as it appears to be affecting other groups as well?
I think it does, because people people see that. So people see that as as a part of it's not officially a part of diversity, but it is in a lot of contexts. And I think where because it's not just stifling about diversity, but when it comes to accessibility, it's like, well, it's some services or some buildings are already accessible. Why do we have to make them better? So that's where I think this is less. That's where I think people are kind of taking advantage of the situation, where they're saying that it's already good enough, it doesn't need to be better. So, and in some cases, kind of taking away those services and stuff like that. So I just think, it is a continuous battle that's happening here. And, there are people fighting for those rights every day. And, there are people but eventually I hope that, the people who are in charge are going to see that it's there. I think honestly, they're only some of the people who are trying to stifle all these voices are just doing it for their own benefit and out of fear. So that's where I think all of this is coming from a place of fear.
I think there's a lot of truth to that it's fear. It's not having a good education about it. And I would hope that with voices like yours there, we will be able to start to see some change, because it is an issue. You said something just now that was very interesting. I gather that accessibility is not considered part of diversity in Florida.
So it's not that it's not considered, but it's not an official part of the DEI acronym. It's an unofficial part of the acronym, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, the acronym of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've talked to a number of people on this podcast, and when I ask them to define diversity, they do provide definitions, and very rarely do they include disabilities at all. And I point that out, and they say, "Oh, it's an equity or something like that."
I think a lot of people are of the opinion that it's it's there without it having to be stated. But the thing is, I think that's part of the problem, where because it's not officially embedded within that acronym, I think it acts almost invisibly, and it's only brought up when you say, "But what about accessibility?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, okay," so.
Well, now that you mention it, yeah.
Yeah, now that you mention it.
Yeah, but they didn't think about it before, which is really part of the issue. And that's what makes it so frustrating. Do you think that also plays into what you talked about before, the whole fear concept?
It does. I do think it plays into the fear concept. But here's the thing that I think also plays into the fear concept, because I feel like still in today's society, we're still tucking away, or people are still teaching their children that if they shouldn't pursue interactions with individuals with disabilities, and that people with disabilities should sort of be in the shadows. I think that is something that's still deeply ingrained within society, that the only thing that's going to change that is people just keep talking about it and raising awareness and that kind of thing. That's the only thing that's going to change that, because I think, ableism is still deeply, deeply involved in the culture of society across the world and across the nation. I think it's still deeply embedded in society, and the only way it's going to change is if people just keep talking about it, and your podcast is doing one of those things.
Well, thank you. I do believe that it's all about the conversation, and we don't get included in the conversation very much, even though the whole category, if you will, of persons with disabilities, according to the CDC, is somewhere close to 25% of our population. Now, it's a fractured community because there are so many different disabilities, and there isn't necessarily a lot of a point of view of commonality, which maybe needs to be a little bit more brought to the forefront. But still, the bottom line is that it's a very large minority, and we don't see people dealing with it. We don't see people including us in the conversation. And it becomes very unfortunate when that occurs.
Yeah, I just think that, being included in the conversation is the first step, and then being brought to the table to be a part of the discussion and the building of solutions is really the forefront of where people who are voices for accessibility and disability need to continue to push and go, because being having the opportunity to turn those voices into actions is really the key to true change.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we move toward wrapping this up, and I really appreciate all your time, but what kind of advice do you have for people, both people who have disabilities and people who don't happen to view themselves as having disabilities?
Honestly, my number one piece of advice to anybody, whether you have a disability or not, is just keep going. If you have a goal in mind and you want to achieve it, keep going. All the people in the world can tell you it's not possible, or you can't do it, but you're the only person who can know what you're capable of. So just don't sell yourself short. That's something that I struggle with, and I continue to strive to do. But at the same time, if you're striving for an opportunity and you just keep hitting roadblocks, try to find new paths and avenues, but at the same time, be willing to listen. And sometimes your circumstances are out of your control, and it's important to realize that you can only do so much to change people's perception of you. And if they don't change that perception, that's not your fault. That's their fault.
There's only so much you can do. Yeah, and you're right. You don't necessarily have control over what happened to you or some of the circumstances that you face, but you always have control over how you deal with it.
Exactly. 100%.
And that's what's really important. Well, I want to thank you for being here with us today. If people want to reach out to you and maybe talk with you or learn more from you, how might they do that?
So everyone, you could reach me on LinkedIn. And I'm trying to build a base of communication. So I'm happy to chat with anybody about anything related to DEI, accessibility. If you've got some opportunity you think might fit my area, I'm happy to talk anytime. And right now I'm really heavy into LinkedIn, so that's my best form of communication.
How do people reach out to you on LinkedIn?
So they can send me a private message, or they can also send me a connection request. That's usually, those are the two forms that I'm aware of people getting in touch via LinkedIn.
So what's your LinkedIn name, or how do they reach you?
They just,
if you can spell it.
Yeah, if they search for me, my first name is Hawa. And my last name is Allarakhia.
Just like it sounds, Hawa Allarakhia. And so it is easy to find her. And it is, as I said, just like it sounds. Well, I hope people will reach out, and we really wish you a lot of success. I would like it a great deal if you would please stay in touch. I would like to do that as well. We want to hear more about adventures that you have, and as you progress, how things go. And you're always welcome to come back here to Unstoppable Mindset and chat some more. So I hope we can do that.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I hope you have a good afternoon.
Well, and I hope all of you out there listening will reach out to Hawa. I would also appreciate it if you'd reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. Love to hear your thoughts. Please feel free to email me at Michael, MICHAELHI at accessibe.com, or go to our podcast page, which is www.michaelhingson.com/podcast. And that's Michael Hingson, MICHAELHINGSON. Also, as I ask every week, and will continue to do so, please give us a 5-star rating for our episode and our discussion with Hawa today. I think it's been great. I learned a lot, and I really appreciate and value the insights that she's given us. So please give us a 5-star rating. I'm sure that Hawa would appreciate it as well. And again, reach out to her. And again, one last time, Hawa, we very much really appreciate you being here with us today, and hope that we get a chance to chat some more in the future.
Absolutely. You have a good afternoon.